Welcome to the Great Detectives of Old Time Radio. From Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham. If you have a comment, email it to me, box13@greatdetectives.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Detectives, and become one of our friends on Facebook, facebook.com/Radio Detectives. Our listener support campaign continues. Today our focus is on Patreon support. Patreon supporters are vital. I've talked about this multiple times. They really provide a reliable stream of income. Prior to us doing Patreon, we would be totally dependent on the listener support campaign, which would generate one-time donations, but lead to a lot of dry periods. We'd have, particularly like April through July would generally be pretty low for donations. But Patreon supporters really have changed that. They provide such a regular, ongoing, reliable stream. It helps so much with our planning. And you can join our more than 180 Patreon supporters at patreon.greatdetectives.net for as little as $2 per month. I will send you a monthly newsletter, and you'll also get to help pick our summer series. Plus, there's just a lot of things that I'll tell or share or give you heads ups on that generally will not come out to regular listeners for a little while longer. So I do encourage you to go ahead, check it out, patreon.greatdetectives.net. But now it's time for us to bring you a previously uncirculated episode of Michael Shayne, Private Detective with Wally Maher. Now, I do know I originally announced that we would be bringing you a previously uncirculated episode of The Adventures of Philip Marlowe. And I'll explain in detail just the circumstances that have made that not possible. I've tried to go back and correct the commentary for as many episodes as have not been released. But I do apologize if anyone had their hopes up for another series. Again, I'll explain in full detail after the episode. But on the bright side, we're bringing you an episode of Michael Shayne. We haven't played an episode of this series since season 7. So it's been, a good 4 years. And this is the Wally Maher and Kathy Lewis version of the series. The original air date is August the 19th of 1946. And this one is The Freeman Murder Case.
The Adventures of Michael Shayne, Private Detective. The people who make the new road-rated 76 gasoline and the new Triton Motor Oil Union Oil Company present The Adventures of Michael Shayne, Private Detective, starring Wally Maher and Kathy Lewis. As the great clouds of fog roll in, the tall buildings of the San Francisco skyline gradually become giant bulwarks in the mist. Most businessmen are at dinner now in the world-famous restaurants of the city. But the light shining in a window of the Rust Building shows that Private Detective Michael Shayne is an exception. As he struggles with the necktie he's going to wear this evening, he munches a sandwich brought to him by lovely Phyllis Knight.
Hey, Phil.
Yes?
Here, help me with this tie, Angel, will you? I can't do a thing with it.
Why do I have to work for a detective? If you were anybody else in San Francisco, your tie would be tied, and we'd be at dinner at Jack's or Vanessi's or Lupo's or... Oh, let me at that tie.
Now, Angel, you know very well I said I'd take you to dinner, but you want to make the first act at the Geary, and... Just a minute, honey, just a minute. Make the knot a little tighter, will you, please?
Glad to. This, my uncultured employer, is the fashionable way to tie a tie. It's known as the Windsor knot.
Oh, yeah? Well, make mine smaller anyhow.
Oh.
I'm not a member of your artist colony yet.
All right. How's that, better?
Oh, that's perfect, Angel. Like you.
Oh. Do you know how long it is since you said something nice like that?
Well, not to change the subject, but that letter on your desk. Who's it from?
Which one?
Oh, the one written with the very fancy hand.
Oh, that. It's from some poet who wants my opinion of his work. I've never heard of him before.
Aha. So you're still the uncrowned queen of the artist, aren't you? How is his poetry?
Well, confidentially, it's... No, don't answer it, Mike, please.
It might be important, Angel.
Well, that's just it. We'll miss the play, Mike, and you promised
I'm
me.
sorry, Angel. Hello?
That's you, Mike?
Oh, yeah. What's new, Inspector?
Oh, no, the inspector.
What do you know about a guy named Van Allen Haven?
Oh, nothing. Why?
I'm out on a case. He's a murder suspect.
I see. So you just naturally assumed that I knew him.
No, not quite. There's a note on his desk. It says Phyllis Knight, Russ Building, San Francisco.
Oh? What did you say his name was?
Van Allen Haven.
That's quite a name. Just a minute. Say, honey, did you ever hear of a guy called Van Allen Haven?
Yeah, certainly. He's the poet that wrote that letter.
Oh, that accounts for it. Inspector, we don't know him, but he wrote to Phil for a criticism of his poems. Say, maybe we'd better drop over.
Oh, Mike.
You're sure you don't know more than you're telling me, Mike?
Well, sure, I'm sure. We never met the guy, but he wrote to Phil. You know, she's got a rep in those poetry circles.
Okay. Come on over. It's that apartment house at Leavenworth and Jewel. It's on Russian Hill.
I'll be right there. Well, come on, Angel. Let's go see how the other half kill. Well, here we are, right on top of Russian Hill.
Yeah, the view's almost as good as from your apartment, Mike.
But different, Angel. Well, come on. Let's see what the fuss is all about.
3 guesses which building it is.
Yeah. Gee, looks like the whole police force is out.
Hi there, Mike.
Oh, hello, Sarge.
Hi. Go right in.
Oh, thanks, Sergeant. The inspector inside?
Yes, sir. He's expecting you. And Miss Knight.
Hello, Sergeant.
Okay, Doc, you can have the body removed anytime. I'm through with it now. Oh, there you are, kids. What kept you?
Well, Mike had trouble with his necktie, Inspector. You know, as far as ties are concerned, he's still living in the Middle Ages.
Oh, don't mind her. She's prejudiced.
Well, come on, kids. We got a lot to do.
Okay, Inspector, okay. Give us a quick rundown.
Look over there at the foot of the stairs. The corpse you see all huddled up is what's left of Robert Freeman. Know him?
No.
I didn't think you would.
What happened to him, Inspector?
Coroner says he was shot in the back while coming down these stairs. He died instantly and fell to the bottom.
Any suspects?
It's an apartment house, Mike. Theoretically, everybody in the building is a suspect. We sent them all back to their own apartments, and we'll question them there.
How about the gun?
So far, we haven't found a thing.
Well, anyone here report the incident?
Yeah, one of the tenants, Miss Rambo, phoned us. I got right over.
Well, what's your opinion, Inspector?
Well, Phil, from the angle at which the bullet entered the body, the killer must have been standing at the head of the stairs. I assume he or she then stepped back into an apartment after firing.
Probably into a front apartment.
Look at the top of the staircase now. You see those 2 doors?
Yeah?
The occupants of both those apartments would have had a better chance to get out of sight after the killing.
I see.
Who lives in them, Inspector?
Well, Phil, here's the list. The one on the right is listed to the deceased and his wife. The left one, let's see. Joseph Bauer, pianist.
May I see that list, Inspector?
Yeah, here, Mike.
Where did the gal live who reported the killing, Mike?
It shows Elaine Rambo on the first floor.
That's right.
Jones, Schmidt, Haven. Oh, here's Van Allen Haven. Lives on the main floor, too.
Yeah, right across from the base of the stairs where we found the body.
And it was in his apartment that you found the note with my name on it.
Yeah, and he's really a poet, all right. Never stops reciting his stuff.
Really? Is he any good?
You can't prove it by me, Phil.
Well, come on, let's have a look at these apartments upstairs, Inspector.
Okay, come on, fellas.
Let's try the 2 at the head of the stairs first.
Yeah, that's what I had in mind, Mike.
Not much of an apartment house, is it?
No.
What do you mean, Angel?
Well, look at these dirty stairs. Dust, sawdust, everything.
Yeah. Say, where's the piano music coming from?
Seems to be the one on the left.
Yeah, that's listed to a pianist, isn't it?
Yeah, Joseph Bauer. And here it is. Pretty good, isn't he?
Yes, and pretty excited, too.
What do you mean, Phil?
Well, I'm no expert, but even I can play Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor without missing that G-sharp note every time, you know.
He must be a callous sort of guy. Anybody who'd play piano right after a murder.
I guess he didn't hear us, Mike.
Mike, look at the crack under the door. There's no light.
Well, he must have cat's eyes to play in the dark.
Well, he's apparently going to ignore us. Let's try the door, Mike.
Hide, it's pitch black.
Can't seem to find the light switch.
You won't find it over there.
Who are you?
Do not reach for your gun. I've taken the precaution of having my own cover the three of you.
You can get away with this.
I appear to be at present, do I not? Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Bauer, Joseph Bauer. And you are...
Inspector of Homicide.
Your credentials, please?
Look, you. Aren't you a little silly playing games in the dark? You couldn't see my badge if I showed it to you.
Try it and see, Inspector.
Here it is, Owl Eyes.
Yes, I can see it plainly. Thank you. I'll turn on the lights.
All right. Let me have that gun.
I have no gun, my friend. But I must take every precaution, especially when I hold such information as I do about the Freeman murder.
In just a moment, we'll rejoin Mike and Phyllis in their adventure. The body of Robert Freeman was discovered at the foot of a staircase in his apartment house. He was shot in the back, apparently from the second-floor landing. Mike, Phyllis, and the inspector have started interviewing the tenants on the second floor, and we find them now with an eccentric pianist called Joseph Bauer.
All right. Out with it, Bauer. What information do you have about the killing?
I will tell you, but you must promise to protect me from any revenge on the part of the murderer.
No harm will come to you.
You can trust the inspector, Mr. Bauer.
You understand that a man in my position has to be careful. There are many who are envious of my great talent.
Yes, Bauer. The information.
When I saw Robert Freeman lying dead, I knew he had been killed by Mrs. Freeman.
By Mrs. Freeman? Why?
The deceased and his widow had been arguing.
Is that all?
Is this not a revelation to you?
Oh, for heaven.
How do you know, Bauer?
I was practicing this afternoon, and I heard them talking. You know, I sometimes practice for many hours in one day.
You were saying...
Oh, yes. Well, I was playing the piano, and I heard their voices, quietly at first, and then they became louder and more violent.
Could you make out what they were saying?
Not at first, but as they grew louder, I heard Mrs. Freeman say, "If you don't stop, I'll kill you both."
Kill you both? Do you know who she meant by both?
I'm sorry, I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Bauer, where were you when Freeman was killed?
I was a block or so away. I'd gone out to buy some cigarettes. When I entered the building, I saw everyone gathered around the body.
Anyone see you come in the building?
There was quite a crowd when I arrived. I don't know if I was noticed or not.
All right, Bauer. I want you to remain in your apartment. We may want to question you again later.
Say, Phil, what are you doing?
Huh? Oh, I'm just looking at Mr. Bauer's telephone pad. What do these represent, Mr. Bauer?
Nothing. I often scribble when I'm on the telephone.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like the initials E.R.
It is nothing of the kind. I'm what you call a doodler. Nothing more.
Okay, Inspector. You ready?
Yeah, Mike.
And now, if you do not object, I'll go on with my music.
That's all right. Go right ahead.
Oh, do not stop, my goodly friend. Play your music to the end.
Ah, Mr. Haven, I am delighted to see you. Permit me to introduce one of the foremost poets in the country, Mr. Van Allen Haven, Inspector of Homicide, and I assume his assistant.
Miss Knight and Mr. Shayne.
How do you do?
Hello.
Have I the honor of addressing Miss Phyllis Knight, who has assisted so many an artist in his plight?
Oh, that's charming. I did receive a letter from you, Mr. Haven.
What a happy happenstance meeting you this way. You read my poem?
Not yet, Mr. Haven, I'm sorry.
Mr. Haven, you live on the first floor?
Yes. Right over there you will find my lair.
The first apartment across the stair?
Oh, quite, Inspector, quite.
Where were you when the murder occurred?
Composing verse in my abode. I always say, for every man some troubles lurk, unless he's busy in his work.
Did you hear the shot?
Ah, yes, I did. The fatal shot.
You went into the hall at once?
Sir, I write poetry. I do not have the heart of lions like my heroes. I but opened the door barely ajar and peeked out. When the crowd gathered, I walked boldly forward.
Yes, Mr. Haven, you knew the deceased?
No. Some months ago, however, I permitted him to read some of my poetry. He didn't like it.
I see.
I wonder if you'd let us use your apartment as a sort of headquarters while we're here. We have to conduct a little investigation, and your apartment would be handy, you see.
My good inspector, say no more. My place is yours, however poor.
Well, thank you.
Here's the key. And since Mr. Bauer's music brought me to this room, I think I'll stay for a while, if you will play.
Certainly, Mr. Haven.
Thank you, Mr. Bauer.
Well, Inspector, what do you think of our two geniuses?
Yes, me, they're crazy as loons.
That Haven character. I've never heard such poetry in my life.
Well, I think we'd better see Mrs. Freeman now and get her story.
Say, Inspector, why don't you have this Miss Rambo here at the same time?
Not while we're questioning Mrs. Freeman, Mike.
Well, I have a reason. Look, Inspector, since the deceased was shot in the back as he was going downstairs, the murderer must have been standing behind him on the stairs or at the head of the staircase.
Well?
I see. With Mrs. Freeman at the top and Miss Rambo at the bottom, one of them must have seen the murderer.
Right.
Unless one of them is lying.
Well, that's why I think it would be interesting to have them both here to check each other's stories.
All right, Mike, we'll try it. Oh, Sergeant.
Yes, Inspector?
Bring down Mrs. Freeman and Miss Rambo.
Right.
Hey, what are you two up to over there?
Say, did you see these?
What are they?
Well, they're miniatures, Inspector.
Huh?
Look at them, handmade carvings of all sorts of things.
No end to Van Allen Haven's talents, huh? What do you make them out of?
Well, some of it's balsa. Some is heavier. Looks like teak.
Yeah. Here's one of Fisherman's Wharf, complete with boats, sidewalk vendors, and everything.
And look at these tools. Everything from a brace and bit
Say, wait a minute, Inspector. Huh? You notice anything unusual about this?
No, except they're small tools, neatly arranged.
Yeah, all but the brace and bit.
That's just what I mean. Each tool is in its place in that wall bracket, except this one brace and bit.
Yes, Haven is too neat and precise to leave a tool like that lying carelessly about. You know, it could fall and break the bit.
Unless he'd used it and was in a rush. Oh, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Not necessarily, no, but I just...
Come in.
Miss Rambo and Mrs. Freeman, Inspector.
All right, Sergeant. Please sit down, ladies. This is Mr. Shayne and Miss Knight. Mrs. Freeman, Miss Rambo.
How do you do?
Hi.
Now, Mrs. Freeman, we'll start with you. Will you please tell us just what happened?
Well, I'll try. It's been a terrible shock.
I understand.
Well, Bob came home late, as usual. I was reading in bed. He sat on the bed, and we talked for a while. Then the doorbell rang, and Bob went down to answer it.
Mrs. Freeman, you mean your husband left the apartment?
Yes. At this time of night, the door downstairs is locked, and you have to go right down to admit anyone.
I see. And then?
Then I heard the shot. I ran out to the head of the stairs and saw Bob lying at the bottom. He was all in a heap.
And then what happened?
And the others started coming out of their apartments.
Whom do you mean by the others, Mrs. Freeman? Just exactly who did you see first?
What? Miss Rambo appeared at the bottom first, I believe.
That's right. I saw you at the top right after the shot was fired.
Then who came out?
Well, I think Mr. Haven came out of his apartment next.
How about the pianist, Mr. Bauer? Did you see him?
Yes, he was there too, I believe.
Did he enter the building?
Well, he may have. I didn't notice.
Now, look, Mrs. Freeman, this is important. You saw all these people on the first floor?
Yes.
None of them came from the second floor and past you?
No. It was several minutes later before anyone came out of their apartments upstairs.
Now, Miss Rambo, I believe you were the one who called the police.
Yeah, I seen nobody else was going to do nothing, so I took over. I just dialed O and said, give me the cops.
When did you do this? As soon as you heard the shot?
No, when I heard the shot, I hot-footed out of my joint as fast as I could. Then I seen Freeman lying there and Mrs. Freeman standing upstairs.
Did you see anyone else? Anyone at all?
No.
You sure?
Sure, I'm sure. Well, the next guy to show was Haven, who come running out of his apartment.
And then?
Well, then a lot of people started showing up from all the apartments.
Did you see anyone upstairs except Mrs. Freeman?
No, not at first.
Was there anyone else on the staircase or inside at all when you first ran out?
No.
Mrs. Freeman, we have testimony that you and your husband had been arguing. In fact, that you threatened to kill him. Is that true?
Well, I may have said something like that, Inspector. But I didn't mean it. I loved Bob.
Then will you tell us why you were arguing?
Bob had been staying away from home often.
Uh-huh.
He said he was working, but I knew it wasn't true.
Do you know whom he was seeing, Mrs. Freeman?
Yes.
It'll be better if you tell us.
No, I can't.
She's a showgirl, Mrs. Freeman, isn't she?
But
She lives in this building. As a matter of fact, she's in this room right now. It's Elaine Rambo, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
Well, kids, it's just too simple.
What do you mean, Inspector?
Well, if the bullet was fired from upstairs and all the suspects except Mrs. Freeman were downstairs, it leaves only her, doesn't it?
Yeah. And her husband being in love with Elaine Rambo supplies the motive.
But you don't believe she did it, Inspector, do you?
No, Mike? I don't think she did.
Neither do I.
Oh, now, wait a minute, you two. You know, we aren't getting anyplace. If everybody but Mrs. Freeman is in the clear, and you don't believe she did it, well, we're up against a stone wall.
That's what it looks like.
Oh, maybe not. Now, look. Here are two women. One at the head of the staircase and one at the bottom. Between them, a man is shot as he comes down the stairs. Now, if Mrs. Freeman had done it, Miss Rambo would have seen the gun. And Rambo couldn't have done it, or the bullet would have entered the body from the front.
So?
So the bullet must have been fired from some other point.
Mike, you're right. Come on, kids. This calls for an examination of the staircase.
We'll rejoin Mike and Phyllis in their adventures in a few moments. Robert Freeman has been murdered on the interior stairway of his apartment house. As we rejoin Mike, Phil, and the inspector, they're examining the staircase, with Mike and Phil on one end and the inspector on the other.
You find anything up at your end, Inspector?
Not yet, Mike. You?
No.
You two certainly look cute, bending over and tapping those stairs.
Well, you look kind of cute yourself, Angel.
Mike, Phil, I'll come up here.
What'd you find?
What is it? Would you find anything?
Look at this step.
Huh?
Right there.
Two holes. Both plugged up.
Yeah. Here, wait a minute. I've got long fingernails. Let me try to get them out.
Go ahead, Phyllis.
Yeah. It's no use. They're in too solid.
Well, here, let me try to push them in.
Here's my penknife. Use it, Mike.
Okay. There. Well, I guess we know where they landed.
In the closet under the staircase. Come on.
Yeah. That's where all the sawdust you noticed came from, Phil.
Yeah?
Be careful. Here, I'll open it.
There are the plugs and two shafts of light made by those two holes.
Yeah. They were bored in the riser of the step, about halfway between the two floors.
Yeah, but why two holes?
One to see through and one to shoot through when the victim was in range.
So the murderer rang Freeman's doorbell from downstairs, as Mrs. Freeman said, then waited in the closet for him to come down. When he got about halfway down the stairs, he was in range of this hole, and he got it in the back. Then the killer plugged the holes and waited for a crowd to gather. When it did, he slipped quietly out of the closet.
And joined the crowd. Well, that's the way it happened, all right.
Okay, Mike. Now we know how it was done, but we're not sure who did it.
No, and our picture has changed completely, too. Before, we thought that everyone on the main floor was innocent, and now...
Now they're the ones who could have done it, and Mrs. Freeman is the only one who couldn't possibly have done it.
Right.
All right. Now, who have we got? Joseph Bauer, Van Allen Haven, and Elaine Rambo.
No, I think we can eliminate Elaine Rambo, Inspector. If she and Freeman were seeing each other, she'd have no reason to kill him. Besides, I can't see any woman boring holes in the staircase to kill a man.
No, but you could see a man doing it, couldn't you?
Yeah. A man handy with tools. And that would account for his leaving the brace and bit around.
Yes, but you'd never get a conviction on that little evidence.
No, you're right, Mike. It's not enough. We're stymied.
Sounds like Mr. Bauer is stymied, too. And by Mr. Rachmaninoff.
Yeah.
What do you mean, Angel?
Well, he can't be deliberately trying to miss that G-sharp note. No, it doesn't make sense. He plays too well.
Huh? Say, wait a minute. Look, Inspector.
What?
Let's try this, huh? We'll switch off all the lights. Have Mrs. Freeman stand where she did at the top of the stairs. Have Elaine Rambeau stand at the bottom. Have Bauer at his piano. And have Haven bring his brace and bit. I've got a hunch we'll get ourselves a nice little confession. Oh, that's beautiful, Mr. Bowers. Beautiful. But right now, I would like to hear you play the C-sharp minor.
See? The Rachmaninoff?
Mm-hmm, that's right.
Oh, but
Play it, Mr. Bauer, or Miss Knight will.
Very well.
Often play the piano in the dark, don't you, Mr. Bauer? Like you were when we first interrupted you.
I need no light to see music.
That's right. But you do need light to see sawdust. Switch on the lights, Inspector. You see, Mr. Bauer? After killing Freeman and leaving the crowd that gathered around his body, you returned here and began playing in the dark. But you didn't notice the sawdust fall from your sleeve into the keyboard. Most of it right under this G-sharp, which doesn't play, as Phil pointed out.
That's not true.
When Phyllis found the scribbling on your phone pad, your hand had been tipped already, Mr. Bauer. This just clinches it.
It's not true, I tell you. It's not true.
Bauer, you're a dead duck. Would you like to go down to headquarters and have the sawdust under your fingernails analyzed? We both know they'd match the sawdust on Haven's brace and bit over there. Why don't you give up?
All right, I did it.
Well, Inspector, I guess there won't be any problem about satisfying the DA, will there?
Michael. You think we could still catch the last act of the Geary?
Oh, could be. But it would take a couple of detectives to figure out what we've missed.
What's the matter with us? Seriously, Mike, there are just two things I can't figure out. First, why didn't Bauer fix that key on the piano?
Well, he didn't have time, Angel. You get sawdust underneath a key, and you've got to practically tear the keyboard apart to get at it.
Well, that's right. Secondly, why did Bauer kill Freeman?
Well, Angel, Bauer was in love with Elaine Rambeau. He knew she was seeing Freeman, so in his distorted imagination, he figured that getting rid of Freeman would give him a better chance.
Oh, so when I found the initials ER on his telephone pad, you realized that they stood for Elaine Rambeau.
Yep. You see, darling, he just couldn't get her off his mind.
Just like you can't get me off your mind. Huh?
Yes, Angel. Just like.
For a solid hour of exciting mystery dramas, listen every Monday on these same stations at 8 o'clock to Michael Shayne, followed immediately by the case book of Gregory Hood. Michael Shayne, private detective, stars Wally Maher and Kathy Lewis, with Joe Forte as the inspector. The sergeant was played by Charlie Lund. Tonight's story was written by Robert Webster Light. and based on the character created by Britt Halliday. Music was composed and directed by Bernard Katz, and this is Ben Alexander saying good night for the people who make the new road-rated 76 gasoline and the new Triton motor oil, Union Oil Company. This is the Mutual Don Lee Broadcasting System.
Welcome back. Well, a really enjoyable episode. I do have to admit, because I've been listening to Kathy Lewis in My Friend Irma and don't much care for her character, it kind of I had to get my head space out of thinking of her as Jane Stacy. But she does have such really good rapport with Wally Maher that I was able to do that pretty easily. And I do enjoy this, sort of three-way rapport you have going on between Wally Maher, Kathy Lewis, and Jewel Forte as the Inspector Faraday. Not to be confused with the Inspector Faraday from our just completed Boston Blackie series. But that is such a fun dynamic because you just kind of hear them, working through the case live. In a way, I think the closest you get to that is, in Let George Do It. But this was even more focused on just that relationship and that thought process, and it is fun to hear, and it's pretty well written. I do wonder, as I often do about these clues about the sawdust in the piano situation, I wouldn't be surprised if we have any musicians, in the audience who'd be able to provide some insight. Although I don't know, musicians who would pour sawdust in their pianos, so maybe we might not find many experts on the topic of whether the solution works out or not. It was also nice to hear this announced by Ben Alexander, of course, Frank Smith from Dragnet. And I don't know if we'd had any episodes of Michael Shayne with Ben Alexander as the announcer. Because the bulk of the episodes that we have for the Michael Shayne program with Wally Maher are from the original 1944 to 46 West Coast run over the Don Lee Mutual Network. Which is just, the Western version of the Mutual Broadcasting System. And we had about 6 months worth of episodes from that period. And the announcers on those were John Lang. And then we also had several from when the series became a national radio series. Not quite as many, and on those, Charles Arlington was the announcer. And so this Ben Alexander as the announcer appears to have been something that occurred late in the West Coast Mutual run of the series. But overall, an interesting episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I would love for there to be more Michael Shayne Private Detective come into circulation. I know back when we started this podcast, there were only 5 episodes of Michael Shayne Private Detective, and most of the Michael Shayne stuff running around was the Jeff Chandler New Adventures of Michael Shayne. So now we actually have a decent amount more of the Michael Shayne Private Detective. And again, it's some interesting stuff, and I hope you enjoyed it. All right, now to that story about we had originally intended to do Philip Marlowe, a previously uncirculated episode, and we couldn't. And essentially, I'll explain. I downloaded an episode from a site. And they had as part of their terms of use, that you would not share the episode that you download from them. And I listened to the episode, and I enjoyed it, but I honored the agreement. I did send a note to the site owner a few years back, asking their permission, and it wasn't something that, he was willing to give because, he'd received it from a friend who hadn't wanted it shared. But then the website actually went away. It went off the internet. Couldn't find any information on it. Sent an email to the site, didn't hear anything back. And I waited several months. And essentially the decision I made and the conclusion I reached is that, this wasn't an issue of copyright. It was essentially an issue where this site had, this exclusive file that they had acquired. And they asked that you not share them. And that's ultimately to the benefit of the site so that they can, continue to have their exclusive programs. But if the site is no longer in existence, there's nothing to protect. And so that's when I, after waiting several months and this site being offline, I, made the announcement of the episode. And I actually listened to the Adventures of Philip Marlowe episode again. Hadn't listened to it for a few years. And was getting ready to record the commentary. And just absent-mindedly checked the site. And it was back on the internet. And so I, decided that, based on that, you're going to honor the agreement, that we had with the site because it's now back in operation. Now, of course, this situation, somebody asked about it because I made a Facebook post on this, if this, is a matter of copyright. And it isn't because this site, they don't own the copyright to the programs. But it'd be kind of like if you owned an original copy of a 17th century book, and you own the only copy of it. The book might now be in the public domain, but that doesn't mean that I can come into your house and, take your copy or, go make copies of it without your permission because you own the copy. So you do have to honor those sort of agreements. So I'm so sorry I was not able to bring you the Adventures of Philip Marlowe episode. Maybe in the future I might be able to. Now, someone also did ask if you're curious and you'd like to go listen to the episode yourself, and, pay the purchase, would you be able to do that? You can certainly go to digitaldailyftp.com. You would need to buy a minimum of a gigabyte, which would be $5, and you would be able to listen to that episode, and then, about 900 megabytes of other stuff. Now, I will mention that a lot of stuff on the website hasn't been updated frequently. The front page mentions Christmas 2016, and their page for the FTP mentions a sale for the summer of 2014. So I would encourage you to send an email to the site, reach out to them and find out if they are still accepting memberships for the FTP before you would go ahead and send a donation. But that is certainly an option. It's just not something I can bring you on the podcast. So thank you so much. Appreciate your understanding on that. And I do want to go ahead and thank our Patreon of the day now. I want to go ahead and thank Phil. Phil's been one of our Patreon supporters since March 2018, currently supporting us at the Detective Sergeant level of $7.14 or more per month. Thank you so much for your support, Phil. And that will do it for now. Join us back here next week as we'll be getting into The Man Called X. And tomorrow, be sure and listen for The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And we will be back next Thursday with our first look at raffles. In the meantime, send your comments to box13@greatdetectives.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Detectives and become one of our friends on Facebook. Facebook.com/Radio Detectives. From Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham, signing off.